All right. Why don't we start? It's nice to see everyone. So, given what happened last time, the conversation and discussion that we had ended up concentrating on the first of the two chapters that we had on hand or on deck to discuss. So we focused our attentions on talking about the moral grounds for understanding economic relations and how that system operates in ways that we often don't recognize because of the ways that certain obligations, social obligations, and ritual behavior that operates as forms of social currency, how those can be turned into money. And that pivotal step, that critical step, is the application of state violence. So we live in a moral world where we all operate along, where we all have our individual moral compasses, and we live in societies that are organized by violence. We hear from the organizers of violence that we, whoever the authority in charge is, that we are on the side of morality, civilization, goodness, progress, and they are not. And that these are merely gambits in a war that gets disguised as the creation of modern civilization. So understandably, we had a lot to really chew on there. So the chapter on deck for today is where that argument goes next in sort of logical sequence. And David Graeber talks about or frames the entire chapter as games of sex and death, starting with the idea that any moral system, if there are contests at play, then those contests have antagonisms at play, and they're contests over something, and that at bottom, life is a contest over sex. There's an instinct there, regardless of one's orientation. Even the lack of interest in sex is a statement of stance on sex. And then finally death, because each day we choose to wake up is our effort to refuse to die. This will go on to take the form of Graeber's sort of a embrace and value theory of certain elements of existentialism, because it is, sort of structured on a creative refusal. So I don't want to say too much about this chapter, because the way that he gets at this is he deliberately starts in scenarios or episodes that really that beautifully illustrate by the end how this system works, but starts off describing it to a let's say a reader like me, a middle-aged white dude who grew up on the East Coast or grew up on the West Coast of the US, now lives on the East Coast. This would be, if not for my love of David Graeber's work, an exotic locale. And what does he in fact show is that these are contests that really have structural parallels across all of human history. So let me see, let me first bring my screen so that I can see everyone simultaneously. That'll help. And if anyone wants to jump in, usually the first speaker, people are reluctant, but let's see if someone wants to just be that first person. That's why I'm a social scientist. Yeah, Christian.
Okay. Just a really short thing. What I like in the beginning, how he starts it off. I'm sorry if I repeat something you just already said because I came in late. But when he says like, there's like this middle brow version of the world where things work as discussed, you know, the rules-based order, so to speak. And once you move away from the middle ground, you know, it's all about basically sex and death. And you can see this in many ways, because if it's about a lot of money, you know, there's usually other perks involved for the people involved. Just like maybe as a personal example, I live in Switzerland, and I have quite a few friends and acquaintances who ended up in the financial services industry. And it really is like that, as it is discussed in you know, it's very much just like who's the big swinging dick, so to speak. And the business is then not concluded in the office, but somewhere else. And all these things really happen all the time, basically. You know, it's not like it's every day, but it's with very big deals, stuff like this happens all the time. And, you know, it's also the same with politics and all this. And I thought it was quite nice that, you know, we have this middle brow culture, which is when we get taught in school, this is how the world works. But once you get to the extremes, no, it really does not. And I thought that was fun to start off.
If any of you have been following the crypto collapse of FTX, if I have the acronym correct, the parallels between the Bush story and the you know the resort, the headquarters that they had in the Bahamas, and the sorts of sex and drug, which is, you know, sort of a sacrificial death of sorts, the kind of sex and drug rituals that they had going on overlapped with the story of the Bush child, just confirming that, right, I mean, it's no surprise that economists would want to then teach people that what they're doing is really a kind of empirical science, and leaving out all the rest. You know, it's no mistake that those are the models that they create. They leave out what is really the part that is the structural determinant, even though that structural determinant might have elements of chance based on it, or that derive from it, like whether or not the Bush child scion decided to have sex with the sex worker, and whether, if he didn't, if that had changed things in that business deal that they were trying to forge.
I have a question.
Yeah, Joseph.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm wondering broadly what kind of society we want to be building and what role money plays in that society. There are a couple sections that I wanted to point out in kind of elaborating on that question. I don't know what page this is on. My little ebook reader doesn't tell me, but there's a section where he's quoting Douglas talking about the Lele culture, where there were rules, but there was no systematic means of coercion. This was the main reason, she notes, that pawnship was so innocuous. There were all sorts of rules, but with no government, no courts, no judges to make authoritative decisions, no group of armed men willing or able to employ the threat of force to back up those decisions. Rules were there to be adjusted and interpreted. In the end, everyone's feelings had to be taken into account, and that there was mediation, public mediation if there were fights. And then a little bit lower on the page, he mentions that this changed when resolution of conflict went to be resolved by villages as a whole, because the villages were capable of violence. And so he writes, it's exactly at this point too where the potential for violence enters, that the great wall constructed between the value of lives and money can suddenly come tumbling down. And so this makes me wonder if we're going to be, and that great wall he's referring to is the fact that the human social currencies were used to represent debts that can't be paid off. There are responsibilities that we have to each other, and that human lives are unique, and that they can't be made equivalent to anything else. And so I wonder if we want to, do we want to create a human economy? Do we want to create some other kind of way of distributing goods to one another? Does this mean doing away with money? Does this mean reconstructing a wall between money and human lives? I'm reminded of another section in another chapter where he's talking about Nietzsche, and he concludes that section by saying that if you ever talk to someone who takes Nietzsche seriously, you should give them a quote of the Alaska native who refused to count favors and keep track of debts. And that was the Alaska natives' idea of what it meant to really be human, was to refuse to keep equivalences, which is what money is. So it's kind of a broad question. I know in another section, David Graeber says that there's no real way we could ever do away with money, since it's rather like music or mathematics, in that forming equivalences might be just a fundamental aspect of the way that we consider the world. So anyway, it's a kind of a broad question, but that's that.
Well, I'm gonna give an immediate answer and exercise my authority. In a plug for the Museum of Care's Philosophers series, I believe it was the Philosophers series, Keith Hart, a huge influence on this book, was spoke to that question, and his take is everyone thinks money's the problem, and in a way it is, but money isn't the problem. It's that there's only one ultimately accepted form that's backed up by the military apparatus of the military industrial complex of the United States. If everything were allowed to be money without any rules prohibiting anything from being money, let's start there.
Yeah, I jumped in because it's something important for me, what you actually, Steven, you mentioned about So I am working on a paper on money. Yeah, and the specifically, it's a long paper, but everything. So yeah. So Keith, I would like to have access to Keith Hart's talk if we can share that, because this is important what he mentioned, and this will probably add some insights into that paper.
Yeah, even
Is it possible for you to share? Is there any link or anything like that I can access?
there is on the YouTube page, the YouTube channel for the Museum of Care, it was recorded.
Okay.
And so I imagine Nika somewhere along, this was maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. Yeah. And then he also has a book that came out. So his talk with us coincided with the publication of his memoir, which my copy is not handy. It's called Self and Society. It's fantastic. He lays out concisely his multiple books worth of learning into, it's maybe a 5-page section on money that it is, yeah.
Yeah, if you can, yeah, okay, that's really great. This YouTube video is there, so I can access. Yeah, so thank you very much, Steven, about this. Yeah, I will. Yeah, just this one observation is, I think one, I could not really reread the chapter because of we had about 2 weeks gap from the 1st of December. It's just one observation I would like to share is that it's if I just get, because I'm working with a bit looking at the history of money, and so it's one thing is that I am taking about from this chapter, as I can recall, is that there exists a moral economy, and like even there is a counting system, but that may not be like for necessarily to like for the purpose of exchanges. It's more there like in many societies they will have the concept of money, but as rather as the unit of account instead of the medium of exchange. Yeah, if we put it simply that way. So that system, how that system is getting broken or getting changed with the exposure to other factors, that was one of his biggest inquiry of this chapter. That's that's it. Yeah, I will have to leave soon, but I can stay for like 5 more minutes. So that's
Simona.
If I may, this is actually one of my favorite chapters of David's, because of the geometrical demonstration of the connection between money, slavery, and violence, and stupidity. The connection. I think the perfect quote is from the last page. I'm not speaking strictly of slavery here, but of that process that dislodges people from the webs of mutual commitment, shared history, and collective responsibility that make them what they are, so as to make them exchangeable. That is, to make it possible to make them subject to the logic of debt. He says you need violence and coercion to enact this process, and you cannot disentangle people from their from their existence without violence. And violence is what makes it possible to not take care of people's will and desires, and just to compel them to marry an old man, and so on. And the chapter shows what happens in a human economy that considers violent means, at least on women, to oblige, and on pawns to oblige them to comply with the requirements of exchanges. What happens when a group of aliens with no moral and a lot of weapons come and ask for slaves and starts a slave trade. But the weakness in the cultural weakness that made it possible was the violence that make it possible to exchange women without their consent. So this connection between sex and exchangeability of people and of violence, the violence that is required for it, and that makes it possible to transform people in money, is the very key of the chapter for me, and the compelling thing, really. So if I can, my answer to Turner would be, we don't necessarily know what kind of society we want to build, but I think the main point is we want a society, we consciously refuse violence and inter-exchangeability of people in the society we wish for. And I'm rereading fragments of an anarchist anthropology with a group of young anarchists here in Bologna. But we were evicted yesterday. I'm so sad for it. And I'll share with you a movie of a wonderful mural that they had painted on the squatted place that has been erased now. I'm really sad about it. So we are reading fragments, and I stumbled just today upon a text where David says moths and clusters unwillingly showed us that not only that it exists a refusal, a counter power. It's this chapter about counter power, that any power creates its counterpower, its opposition, its revolts and refusal. But also that it exists societies that don't have this kind of power, and yet they have conscious means in their collective imagination to prevent such powers as the kings or power wealth to emerge in their society. And this kind of societies have a lot of imaginary violence, but no actual violence in their relationships in the day-by-day reality. And so this kind of conscious refusal is what I want for our revolution.
Hey, Christian.
Maybe jumping in when we talked about the violence and what Simona just mentioned as well. When I reread that chapter, there was this passage when he drew the comparison between the Aro Confederacy and modern day mafias, where he basically said you create the situation of instability, and at some point people are just so tired of the violence in the streets, they're willing to accept a new code of laws that is so harsh, but just about anything to make, to take away the violence and the uncertainty of that. And this is, I found myself reminded of various situations that are quite modern where you have this. And the first thing that sprang, so you can see this is not just history, this is the present, because after World War II in the 60s and 70s in Italy, you had the strategy of tension. This is exactly the same thing he describes here, where you create a situation where there's insecurity and violence, and the population basically craves for somebody to jump in and make this go away again. And this is, to this day, the strategy you see in coups around the world. You destabilize the society, and then you can go in. And funnily enough, this usually goes hand in hand with neoliberal market reforms. So in a way, these things have gone together for a very long time. And if you look at this from this point of view, this is not just a description of things that have happened in the past. This is a description of things that are happening today. And I thought this also makes it quite relevant.
Yeah, there's a real benefit to creating the problem, especially if you're the authority, the only authority who gets to decide what the solution is. It's a way of reproducing yourself and a structure of authority and hierarchy. And if you think about the parallels that can be drawn from that kind of analysis, these days what gets, shock doctrine, I see. We call these in the business world, they get called disruptions. These are market disruptions. They used to be called innovations. That's what Schumpeter called them. Before that, it was rationalizations, efficiencies. And all of this goes back to creating initial problems that need not be problems, especially if we all just walked away.
That makes me wonder what you just said about if we all just walk away, in response to what you said, Simona. What does the conscious refusal of violence look like in practice?
In The Dawn of Everything, David suggest three kinds of freedom that they put at the origins of not just at the origins, as the most common notions of humanity. And one of them is the right to disobey. Of course, to disobey without consequences. And another one is the right to move away. This conscious refusal of violence would be I would say what Walter Benjamin called pure means. But then a friend of mine told me, hey, guillotine is considered a pure mean by Walter Benjamin. So no, it's not this thing. When you don't have coercion, when you don't have violence, that is a mean to coerce people in doing what the community decided, not necessarily a king or a violent patriarch. Just it can be the whole community that decides something. If it's enforced through violence and not through mediation, consultation, consensus, it opens the door to any kind of power, of disentanglement, of slavery. And properly saying, even the way we work in contemporary society is ultimately violence. David said it is slavery because poverty is coercion, poverty is violence. So I want at least a society based on consensus, on the respect for everybody's will, on agreements. Agreements are pure means and not guillotine, that are a consistent alternative to violence. And one of the great things David did with Moss, Clusters, Marshall Shalins, and many others is to show that such societies existed and so they can exist in the future. We can make it. Christian, Christian, you raised your hand, or
Folks are quiet. Well, it's not a class, so there are no expectations of anything of any kind. Yes, Rob.
just a few days ago, I've heard a writer and poet, and I know him very well, Wolf Wondracek, has been invited for a congress, a future congress, to give a speech, and he opened the question about the future, and he said, I mean, he's a poet, and he's very lovely to listen to him, but he said he belongs to a generation where a song line was very important, and it was Janis Joplin. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. And then he spoke a little bit around that. So there is and one part of that is also that he once started after finishing school to read books to a blind person, made money out of something which is not visible. He was not visible. So and the other thing is to imagine freedom is only another word for not having a career to lose, not having any wealth to lose, not having money to lose. And he meant what he's talking about is passion. You can't find words as a writer because of receiving money. Of course, we are talking about poverty, like Simona said, is violence, but this is also a reasonable way out of it, I think so. To find passion for something, to find yourself, to have education where this will be possible. Most of the people fit into the structure. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I've given some thought to that line from the song, me and Bobby McGee, about freedom being nothing left to lose. And in fact, I was thinking about it just the other day. I understand and agree. I also with that idea of the lyric. It's also, though, it made me think about, why is freedom something that we even debate over? Like, everyone has different definitions of freedom, and one of Graeber's great contributions is the three-pronged notion of freedom that Simona just spelled out. He, of course, starts with the idea of, why should we even question whether or not we have freedom? Like, why should we not start with freedom? Why should my freedom depend on someone else's why should my freedom depend on someone else's application of their freedom? Or even worse, their application requires the refusal of my freedom. Why do we live in a world where some people get to be free and others don't? Instead, we more than quibble, we war over what's our definition of freedom, when really we should be asking some different, more fundamental questions. How we ask those, on a global level is incredibly complicated. If you start from the premise that you need global agreement, if you start locally, then you're actually doing, again, what Simona said, you know, the means, but the means are the process itself of building the consensus, the agreement. Yeah, and the way the chapter is structured, it's able to highlight all of these big ideas, but do it from vantage points where the historical parallels he's drawing across time and space are you know, just very eye-opening. And like a lot of his other work, it was not his. He was drawing on a huge, well, maybe huge is too strong a word, a large body of scholarship that already existed. You know, this was not a scholarly monograph. He did no new primary research for it. It was just based on bringing new eyes to old patterns. Michael.
I had another comment that I was going to make, which is kind of a remark to Christian's starting remark, but just on the freedoms, just another word for nothing left to lose. I mean, that sounds like a funny phrase to me. It's quite a cynical remark, and it does suggest that, in some ways, that idea of freedom is an idea of we have how much of the things that we have are kind of hold us in place. And so the idea of nothing left to lose is like, oh, I'm free because I have a job, but I have commitment because I have a job. If I lose my job, so I don't want to lose my job, so I won't say this to my boss or something like that. So it does kind of is a remark about how many things. And in the chapter, they talk about the people joining the secret society of the Elki in Nigeria as the slavery comes in and slowly kind of destroys African society and creates a huge amount of violence that all the institutional structures are overwhelmed with this kind of violence. And all those people who want to join the Elki society, they're kind of pawning off their things. So they're in debt in order to be more powerful in this society or to have some status. And so that kind of like freedom is just another thing. I wonder if that's a remark on that. But the kind of comment that I wanted to make was just with regard to Christian, when he said, oh, yeah, it's like that it's all about sex and death in the stock market. I don't know how much about a death it is, but like about sex, and I suppose you hear those types of things as like sort of you see those kind of humor, but I don't necessarily see that in my life. I see, like, I thought this chapter doesn't have a lot of sex and death in it. It has the issue of violent, like those as things that people are interested in as sort of fundamentally human things, but their manipulation is being part of the process of creating debt. And funny enough, to me, the chapter was mostly about debt creation. And the sex and death thing was really about like how institutions use the topic of I'm a free man to as an agreement that you can go into a debt, and then they use that debt and the violence to force people into, an indebted relationship, which ultimately becomes slavery. And the whole sex and death thing seems to me, maybe I'm wrong. He definitely does talk about that. Seems to me like a cool title that people, because it's a phrase, you know what I mean? It's a cool title, but there is a little bit of that in it. But is that really what the chapter is about?
Anyone want to speak to that? I want to kind of argue the point that it is.
Yeah, go ahead, because I'm just asking the question. I really don't have a point. I'm kind of being the devil's advocate for the title.
I feel like I'm over speaking, but if others are not chiming in, this is a form of radio, and so I'm avoiding dead air at all costs. Even though this isn't like we could just sit here silently. I got to be the historian on the Janis Joplin thing, because there is a point there, and it's kind of the elephant in the room. It's a Janis Joplin song. She's known for it because she recorded it and brought it to fame. It was written by Chris Christopherson, a Californian who won a Rhodes Scholarship to study from a summa cum laude graduate of Pomona College, who went on to earn a Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford, who while there wrote poetry, including these words. So it's about a person, a sort of highly educated, privileged white dude who's imagining coming back from Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar to sweep the floors in the CBS recording studios at Nashville, where Dylan's recording Blonde on Blonde, hoping that he can get the chance to see the master. So it really speaks to this idea of one enslaving oneself to something. Chris Christopherson did. He set aside privilege that he had that allowed him the honor, the surplus dignity of being able to survive. So think of all of the female labor that went on to allow him to do that, to have the luxury of saying, I'm free. You just make it disappear. Just went poof. So, it's all sex and death. It's all sex and death. We're having sex right now. I'm sober. Simona, save me from myself.
I would like
I
to,
totally agree.
I would rather have you go into a little bit more depth about your premise,
Okay, which premise?
that it's all sex and death and
Well,
and
not that there isn't sex and death. I would never suggest that, but things are sex and death first if we start from the premise, and maybe this is being a little loose, a little sloppy categorically, but if we start with the premise that life is first, the refusal to kill oneself, then right now this is a game of death. Am I doing an ontological gambit? Which then makes it a game. I'm trying to avoid it, but I'm also, we're all sort of playing games. So the sex part right now, no, but if we start from the premise that there's a structural similarity between social reproduction, sex, and social reproduction, creating value, bringing new universes into existence, then this is a form of social reproduction. It's just not, sex. But how do we define sex? How do we define objects? How do we define subjects? Right, and that's where gambits come down to being, what universes are we bringing into existence as we relate in real time in the kind of structures of existence that really exist, that create empirical experiences, but then those experiences create events, and then all of those events are shaped by, propelled by mechanisms which can never fully be empirically proven. And so therefore, what is it that's guiding us? Well, we're breathing to live another day. Social reproduction. and death. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Everything else is kind of, materiality, but they're relationships that are brought into specific historical and material material. Yeah, that's the word. That's my 2 cents. What do I know?
I'd like to follow up.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is it's sex because it's survival, therefore it's reproductive, Okay, we're continuing. I don't know how the whiff of freedom comes, but Janis Joplin's line was an inspiration. I don't know how many people to get that sense of that, on the road, wind in your hair, direction free. And that is really important. And I think it's part of the Jubilee, that sense. And that is almost like the beginning of how we can create, like you're saying, why don't we start with freedom? Yes, that's 0. Let's take it from there. And freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing.
Thank you. That was great. I was not expecting that at all. Yeah, I agree with I mean, I really appreciate that. That was wonderful. Oh, Simone, is your hand up again?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't,
I will agree with anything Paula says if she thinks. Oh, it was so beautiful, Paula. Yeah, I think it's actually about sex games with sex and death, because it's about human economies, and human economies are games of sex, not just reproduction, sex in the sex terms, but it's about the whole chapter is about what Lele did, the complicated exchanges of lives as payment for the debt of having caused the death of a member of the community, and this intricate network of relationships of potential debts, because that in any moment you can be considered responsible for the death of somebody, and owe something, and owe a life in exchange for the life you have supposedly taken. So the point is what happens when this kind of human economy come into contact with commercial economies. It's page 155. And the premises for the inter-exchangeability of people are already in the human economy system, in the network. I think it's in this same chapter that David explains the fundamental truth that is in eye for eye and life for life. so the premises are already there in human economies, but human economies are about games with sex and death. When commercial economies with their version of exchangeability come in, it's a disaster. And the disaster is about well, the disaster comes in because aliens come into those human economies and distort the consequences of it. Where you had a network of relationships, you have people disentangled. A very short note about this idea of exchange of miserability. We are not free in as much our time here is inter-exchangeable. 1 hour of my time is equal to 1 hour of any other worker. This is alienation, and this miserability, alienation is what makes it miserable, and what makes it possible to measure it is the fact that when I sell my time, I have to obey to the one who bought it. It was an off topic. As for Janis Joplin, actually, this is a very old idea. This is Stoicism. If you are willing to die, if you are not free, you are free. The problem is we are not always willing to die. The problem is, I repeat, poverty is violence, and we are not free until we are under the threat of violence, which doesn't mean actual violence, which doesn't mean we will be killed or left dying on the side of a street. It just means we are under this threat. That's all, folks.
Hey, Michael.
I just jump in and I sort of like, I think a bunch of things. Mark convinced me in the chat a bunch of examples of this sort of sex and death. And Simona made a really great statement in terms of like it as a basic, like that's the kind of human economy in a small village. What do? You're like in interaction with people, and the big things in your life are, you know, in some sense, getting together with some other people and having, you know, a new generation, and the other big things are maybe deaths when people die, right? So we don't think so much because nowadays the big things are what price is the stock market and all of this kind of other stuff in our economy. But that transition from a small kind of community where it does say games with sex and death, where those kind of common interests of, sort of reproductive labor and dealing with the change of transitions, the sort of values in our lives that don't seem much about the economy, right, are somehow translated into what we now call an economy. And that is where these sort of games with sex and death starts to move into this level of debt or violence. And I thought the phrase turning chickens into cows, which was on page 147, and it was basically like the idea that you don't you have this social taboo against like exchanging particular types of things. So you can, if you're doing food or something like that, you can simply trade with food and all that. But if you're talking about women or partners, that's on a whole different sphere and they don't interact, right? And this is commonly true of many kind of cultures, and that idea of a striated value system, right? So, and we have it here too, right? Like the idea that everyone has their price is definitely not, is like a capitalist idea. Everyone has their price. Okay, so how much would you sell your mother for, right? So like actually, people don't sell their mother as a general rule, or it's considered despicable if you do, right? The idea that some things don't have prices is because they're on a different value system, but by using kind of violence or kind of coercion or these games with death or sex, then you transfer those kind of types of exchanges, so you cross one over. And that's the idea of turning chickens into cows. You're only allowed to exchange chickens for chickens and cows for cows, but somebody counts it up and makes a universal equivalent, then you can charge a debt in any form of exchange. And your place in society then only becomes how much of the universal equivalent you have. Not, you have, even though you're in debt in chickens, you still have cows. I mean, I don't know if that's a good example, because I didn't really understand the phrase, but I thought that was what it was, turning chickens into cows, because in principle, no amount of okra could get you a brass rod, just as in principle, no number of brass rods could give you full rights to a woman. So those are the striated economy. Do we have really a striated economy? Because to me, that's what if we were going to try, how would we build a striated economy today? Where you have certain value systems. That's also in, when he talks about in what is the type of trade in beads in North America that is really the ceremonial beads for the Iroquois tribes are not about money. They're about politics and dealing with weregild and smoothing over debts and things like that. Big ceremonies. They're not really about money.
Hey, Sid.
Hi, I wanted to raise a point which hasn't been mentioned yet on page 158, where he quotes Adrian Vickers on the Bali's famous cockfights. And I just maybe briefly can quote the quotation. It says, "Kings even helped put people into debt by staging large cockfights in their capitals. The passion and extravagance encouraged by this exciting sport led many peasants to bet more than they could afford. As with any gambling, the hope of great wealth and the drama of a contest fueled ambitions which few could afford, and at the end of the day, when the last spur had sunk into the chest of the last rooster, many peasants had no home and no family to return to. They and their wives and children would be sold to Java, i.e. sold because of a gambling debt." And I'm afraid I wasn't here last time, but I haven't heard till now anyone raise the topic of gambling, because gambling to me is, which is touched upon in this quote, is an essential element of debt in so many myths and truths. And I was wondering if anyone else had picked up also on the topic of gambling, because it seems also, I think, Steven, you touched upon earlier Schumpeter, and Alice Schumpeter, when talking about innovation, was really talking about the role of the entrepreneur, which is destroying something. And what is the entrepreneur driven by is this conviction that ultimately he destroys the status quo, creates something new in order to make money fast. One doesn't always want to talk about that making money fast, but that making money fast, and what is gambling also, it's also about this dream of making money fast. And so I'm just wondering if anyone else had also wondered or about this whole thing of gambling, because I think it's also seen somewhat, yeah, it seems an important element as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a very important point. And when the chapter, the later chapter, when Graeber explains the formation of the great capitalist empires, he returns to the question of what is capitalism that he sort of tossed out at the beginning of the book, hasn't yet fully answered it, other than by the time he gets to, I guess it's chapter, well, he starts the historical part in chapter 8. So it's maybe 10 or so by the time he gets to Hernan Cortez. And what he returns to precisely to the point of gambling as the way of explaining what was it about Cortez and this shift that happened, this new world shift, that allowed for the creation of capitalism. How do we even understand capitalism? And what Graeber argues is that we have to consider capitalism as itself a game where those who are willing to risk, to gamble it all, will be the only ones allowed to win. So those who are able to wager the most, risk the most, one of them will win. So like right now, for a little while, that was Elon Musk. He identified himself who's willing to step into this battlefield and you know, make war. He's willing to take this gamble on. There will always be a world's richest person, so there will always be someone willing to make that gamble. There will also be, and Graeber doesn't flesh this out, but capitalism is not only about the gambler in the casino, but it's about the spectators in the casino as well. That there's always a third party to this, and to think of these just as a two-part dialectic isn't really enough, because there's always going, whatever.
But Steven, you're focusing on the winner of the gambler.
Right. Okay. So
right? In the Pandavas, in the Mahabharata, in the Indian mythology, there's also all this. I think it was Tom who talked about it's taboo to give away one's wife, and this quote actually says about giving away one's wives if one loses one's debt. And this book is all about debt. And in fact, I think as much as interesting it is about to talk about the winners, I think it's the losers of the gambling, which is just a byproduct of the game, that is really what this book is about debts. How are debts created? And there are many elements and many ways to create debt. And one way is being sucked into a game of gambling.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is no debt. And I agree with you that we should, you know, that like, we don't want history to be that of the winners. And Graeber knows that. What he's saying is that anytime that there are indebted people, there are creditors. There's the other side of that bet. So we hear about the winners because they're the ones who pay people to write their history afterwards. We don't hear about the losers because they don't get to write their own history. It's on their debts that the winners have made their fortunes. Graeber's aware of that. Graeber goes a step further and says, what we really need to do is expand our conceptual approach to also include the ones that are the majority of population at any given time who are saying, oh, that casino, I'm not going in there because that's where they steal from you. And that's where they play, you know, rigged games against me. So that's that third party in this case. So there's not only the losers, but that anytime that the very game is, is one of only winning and losing. And so why have we constructed a society where we think the point is to win or to lose, when really the point is to evade, to avoid, and refuse to allow scenarios where there are only winners and losers, unless people who are happy to win and lose and play these silly games are off in a safe space away from me doing it. I want no part of it. That's the kind of fuller take, I think, that gets developed in the dawn of everything.
Yeah.
Here, it's, you know.
But the safe space today would be the casino, right? Or the lottery ticket. It's a safe space to perform that gambling. Ironically, in America, these casinos, they're safe in the sense that they're regulated. You go in that room, you toss
they're safe. They're safe in that you know who the bully is, and the bully is the banker. So,
or actually, ironically,
that's not my definition of freedom or safety.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want near bankers. Christian, I see the time, so
Yeah.
you want to finish us up?
I don't know. That seems like a tall order.
No, all you have to do is say goodbye.
Oh well, goodbye then. Talking about the whole gambling thing. Something else that came to my mind is if you look at the way society is seen, sort of the lens of people that do not have very much and that do not have very many chances. If you look at the US, you know, if you, for example, if you look at the black ghettos, if you look at rap music and all that, it's the game, right? The game's the game. Everybody's always playing the game. And in a way, this is just, it doesn't get much more street than this. And there's like a profusion, there's a way of grasping the underlying reality with these words, because this is what it's about, right? And all these people, they're gambling with the only thing they have, their life. And a lot of these people die, actually. They die young, they end up in prison. And to some degree, if you want to be really cynical, you could say America is completely structured all around that. Because the US currently, okay, this is just my opinion, has two functioning social systems, the military and the prisons. And if you're poor, you can choose which one you go into. Oh. And if you want to get out of this into respectable societies, let's say what the official route would be, you go to college, get a good degree, you know. If you're poor, you have to go to the military, because if you're not in debt, you wouldn't go to the military, right? And so all these things kind of hook into each other, and then it's a huge gamble. And in a way, this is also true of the example you said earlier on of Hernán Cortés, because he didn't go in there because he thought it would be a great adventure. He was up to his eyeballs in debt, and at the same time, he himself used the same mechanisms that made him go in and actually do this crazy thing, which he pulled off. I mean, he's like Elon Musk and something. He did something maybe just by chance and other factors that's usually impossible. But every once in a while, you get a massive outlier like this. And at the same time, it's not completely what can I say, illegitimate on a moral scale, because you are actually bringing something to this game, your life. You're willing to die for this. So somebody who's going to put it all on the line is not completely, you know, there's something redeeming in that, I think. And this is why it also helps to kind of to legitimize this kind of thing, because there's, look, these guys, it's all bad, but you know, he was willing to pay the ultimate price, and you have to respect this, right? And then you go back to the whole honor society where you can acquire, and it also hooks back into each other. And finally, maybe something else that just came to my mind. I mean, I'm not really sure whether it was the Inca or the Aztec. I think it was the Inca, where he had captured the Inca Atahualpa, I think, and then they were playing this game, right? And they were wondering why he kept on playing and he was losing more and more gold. And I think David Graeber said that there was one move in this game that he was playing with them that was unknown to the others, where you could basically invalidate the whole thing. If you get this one, it's kind of, you're flipping the coin, and once in a billion, it'll land on the side and it'll stay upright. And this is the thing you're aiming for, right? So this is where it all hooks together to some degree.
If we have another few moments, I'd like to add something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll make this our concluding thought then.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to run. I mean, you're welcome to stay on after me, everyone, of course. Joseph.
The rights that Simona mentioned from the dawn of everything, the right to disobey, the right to move away, wonder how that ties into this conversation about Janis Joplin, the Janis Joplin quote about freedom being having nothing left to lose. If we think about rights as a freedom or power or willpower, then the right to disobey is really the willpower to disobey despite the consequences. And that when you have nothing left to lose, the consequence of disobedience or of action may be better than the consequence of inaction. And there's a sort of interesting connection to that idea in this last chapter about the young Lele women who had nothing left to lose and so ran away and were accepted in other villages as village wives. And in those other villages, they experienced great freedoms. Seemed like they were kind of treated like princesses. Yeah.
Yeah, historically, they become stranger queens, or in the male case, stranger kings. These exceptional figures from beyond who arrive with good news and glad tidings.
Yeah, so it's like if you have a society, like what the idea of the right to disobey without consequences, the right to move away, to me that evokes an idea that you live in a society that cultivates your ability to do those things, that your society is rather forgiving. Whereas the Joplin quote, freedom being another word for nothing left to lose, is that to me evokes an idea that you live in a society that is not accommodating to your freedoms. And so you're basically just saying, screw it, I have nothing left to lose, I'm going to go out on my own. And so that's interesting about that idea of if you have nothing left to lose and you're able to go encounter a village that will accept you, it's kind of like those two ideas butting up against another. You're going from a place that doesn't provide your freedoms to a place that will. Whereas like having to take the gamble and go into the military, you're stuck in a society that doesn't, allow you to forgive your debts. You're stuck in, you still have nothing left to lose. You haven't found that society that will accept you. I don't know if that makes any sense where I'm going.
Well, the stranger queens of the Lele have exactly the freedom to move away, and this is what allows them to disobey. This is the very point. Yeah, the difference is exactly as you say, between societies that accommodate to your freedoms and not. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Another rich conversation. I really, I'm grateful for everyone who's come. We will do this again in 2 weeks' time, the next 2 chapters, and feel free to bring extra intriguing quotes or things that you find fascinating and want to bring up for discussion. You know, as our conversations are developing, it's clear that the parallels that Graeber wants us to draw between then and now, anytime then and now, there and here, there anywhere, here anywhere, so that he can guide the reader through these tensions, these moral, really, it's a moral dimension, it's a moral confusion that is at the bottom of the human condition, because it turns on things that humans of various places that are in contact now regularly don't necessarily have shared value systems around which to define themselves, even though we all define ourselves around value systems. So then how does this play out when fused with violence of the most profound effect that we'll see when bullion, metal gets harnessed by state apparati? So look forward to it. See you in 2 weeks' time, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
You still have your hand raised. Is okay.
Thank you.
Simona,
Yeah.
I would like to add another thing to what you said, if you don't mind.
Of course.
The point I was trying to make about Lele women going from a place where they have nothing left to lose to a village that will accept them and provide their freedoms kind of sort of breaks down in 2 ways. One is the way that you mentioned, which is the fact that they have the right to leave in the first place from the first village. But then on the other hand, when they get to the other village, they do have responsibilities, or they do have, like in some ways, one of the things that was mentioned is that they're expected to have sex with any man, basically. So it's not like they go to this other society and they have total freedom to do whatever they want. But so I just wanted to say that I do think it's interesting that they're able to, that this idea of the Janis Joplin quote is kind of like this desperation is what I get that feeling from that. You from that desperation, you have willpower to take action despite the consequences. And when there's a place that you can go when you run away that will provide you with a life that has meaning and is allows you to thrive and to some greater degree have freedom, there's healing for that desperation, was the point I was trying to make. But it's not like a perfect flip, you know.
Interesting point, really. And yeah, I have also issues with the freedom to disobey, because well, it's difficult. How do you manage to have a society working with people free to disobey, to not to respect pacts and commitments? Because to disobey is also to it's complicated, but maybe it's not for tonight. But yeah, I'm still
wanted
thinking about it.
to respond to what you're just talking about with the concept of civil initiative, in which you have agreed upon rules. You know, you can even take on, you know, say the Magna Carta or one's constitution, especially in this country, in the United States, which has some robust ideas that we're not, that we've walked away from. So in civil initiative, you're disobeying the government and their police minions and judges and bureaucrats, and actually common sense in a society. When you go back and you look at the rules and you adhere to those. So I'm finding that a comfortable place to consider action which is nonviolent, yet in resistance to illegal actions of governments.
Yeah, and this may be a little off topic. It's more a topic of the you know, the whatever's the big yellow book, the Dawn of Everything. But
Oh yeah.
it seems like the answer to that question might be in a big society, yes, you have all these debates about this, but in small society where it begins, it seems kind of easy to say people can walk away, they don't have to respect another person, but then they then have to be able to look after themselves, because that other person then, and you're basically saying separation. So it's the freedom of movement, it's the freedom of association is the freedom. I don't have to respect your bullshit if you think I'm bullshit. And then what happens is that the societies that are successful are ones that kind of cooperate and work, and people grow up with a sort of sense of, I know how to interact with other people and what is appropriate, and when people will walk away from me and when people will not. And those societies are stronger because they work cooperatively together. They care about one another. There will sometimes be societies that are sort of weaker when somebody who isn't going to be cooperate, so they kind of manipulate. And oftentimes they, in order to preserve strength, they capture and use violence to capture other people's society. But I think that freedom to disagree with is, you know, could work, and it makes sense in that sense because it's paired with people have to know how to build a cooperative working frame. You can disagree with people, but you also have to know if you disagree with people, are you on your own? You can't live alone. You need a community. You're much better off. Can I ask, what do we have to read next time? And is it 2 weeks, or is the holiday disrupt stuff? Because we went from 2 chapters a term to 1 chapter a term. And I think if people are joining in, according to looking at what's on the Museum of Care and the events, we should probably change the text to make sure it represents where we are, so they don't join in, or they don't not join in because they think we're way ahead and we're actually just moving very slowly through the book, which is fun. I think that's great. It'll mean that we get extended, but
I would propose to read 1 chapter at a time.
yeah, it's probably good to chat with Steve around this because he's the one thing, but
Okay,
I don't know if he'll disagree with anything we say. Other people say, what do you think?
I would agree. I also think in my calendar, it's the next one is next year. So it's in 3 weeks, January 5th.
That's good. We might not see Steve in 2 weeks.
Correct. So that
Is that right? That's what the Museum of Care calendar?
I think we can send him an email. We can send an email to the mailing list that everybody read. And also we see each other for the housekeeping committee.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So he'll be there, so then we can ask him about what he thinks. I also was thinking maybe we can do the housekeeping committee as a general assembly this time, because this is the end of the year, and yeah, but maybe I can write it to everybody in the housekeeping committee.
How does one get on this mailing list?
just send an empty email to museum.care rise up. It's at the end of every page of museum.care.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's great feedback because it's useful to know when people come and are interested, how, if they see the website, why did they come, all that, and then make suggestions for how it would be better. That doesn't mean it'll get done because somebody's got to go do the editing and whatever, and that there's not less people to do all the work around here. So, but suggestions is always great. Like information about how you found this and all that kind of stuff and whether it was useful and what.
Yeah, this is, I will post in the email in chat how to get to the, and I will just put now in every video on YouTube, this send email to Museum of Care. I was thinking it's obvious, but obviously it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to be disorganized or confused because we're lazy or just disorganized, but I think it's bad to be disorganized or confused because we're dumb and we don't know what we should be doing. It's great to know what we should be doing, and then whether we do it or not, that's another thing.
Yeah, okay, so thank you very much, everybody. It was an amazing discussion.
Bye now.